The screens were all still flashing. Winner, Challenger Red. Yay me.
"Congratulations, Challenger Red,"
came an amused voice from behind me. I whipped around to see a man standing inside the door. It was Saint Dane. He was in the form of the trustee from Block. He had quietly slipped into the room like a snake. The character he was playing on Quillen was short and thin, with long bony fingers that moved like the tentacles of an octopus. He was the kind of guy you wouldn't look twice at, but if you did, you'd see a mad fire behind his eyes and wish you hadn't. "What am I doing here?" I asked. Saint Dane crossed to the desk. I circled the other way, always aware of how dangerous he was.
"Don't be so suspicious, Pendragon," he said with a smirk. "You're in no danger. I simply asked to have a private audience with the new challenger who everyone has such high expectations for. There's nothing sinister going on."
"Nothing sinister?" I said. "This territory is a nightmare. The people here are zombies who have to gamble for food. They bet on games where people die. That's not sinister?"
"No,"
he answered.
"That's free will."
He chuckled and sat behind his desk. He put his feet up like he owned the place. If he was a trustee of Block, I guess he did.
"Whatever this territory has become, it is the fault of the people themselves. Doesn't that make you happy?"
"Happy? Because
it's exactly what you're fighting for,"
Saint Dane said innocently.
"To make sure the territories can prosper without being influenced by the likes of me. Isn't that right? Look around, Pendragon. This is what becomes of a territory when man's true nature is left to take its natural course. Congratulations."
"Oh, give me a break," I said. "You expect me to believe you had nothing to do with this?" Saint Dane stood and strolled toward the huge window. I was glad he didn't transform himself back into his normal image, the tall, thin demon with the jagged red scars on his bald head. That would have sent me over the edge.
"As hard as you might find it to believe, it's true," he said. "I'm simply an interested observer. The people of Quillen have no one but themselves to blame for what they've become."
"I don't believe you," I said. Saint Dane looked out over the gray, grim city and said,
"Pendragon, you are blind. Or at least you choose not to see what is in front of you. You believe there is good in everyone, and if given the choice, the path to prosperity and peace will always be taken. Well, that simply isn't the case, as I've proved to you time and again. But you refuse to see."
"All I see is you fooling people into thinking you're helping them," I said. "Being tricked into disaster isn't the same as choosing disaster."
"Ah, but that brings us to Quillen,"
Saint Dane said while clapping his bony hands together with glee. He enjoyed talking about people's misery. Creep.
"The people have found themselves in this dreadful condition for one reason and one reason alone: greed."
"Greed?" I echoed skeptically. "These people have nothing."
"It wasn't always like that," Saint Dane said. "At one time, Quillen wasn't much different than your second Earth. It was quite the prosperous territory. Most people lived in comfort, which created the perfect opportunity for an enterprise like Block."
"What exactly is Block?" I asked quickly. "A store?"
"Indeed,"
was his answer.
"At least, at its core. Several generations ago, a small market opened right here in the city of Rune. Block. Their plan for success was simple. They offered products at a lower cost than their competitors, much lower. It was an innocent business decision, nothing devious. At first, they lost so much money they nearly had to close, but they stayed afloat for one simple reason. People couldn't resist the lure of paying so much less for all the things they wanted. It was as simple as that. So the people of Rune abandoned the other merchants and tripped over themselves to buy their goods from Block. Little by little, the other merchants lost so much business that they had to shut down, which gave Block even more business. As the competition dwindled, Block slowly raised their prices, though they continued to keep them much lower than their remaining competitors. Slowly, Block became profitable and powerful. What started as a small store that sold simple items like clothing and furniture grew. Block began selling food and automobiles, all at such a low price that thrifty consumers couldn't pass up the bargains, which made Block even more profitable. As their business grew, Block moved into manufacturing. They not only sold the items, they created them. Their mandate was to manufacture items as simply and cheaply as possible. They didn't care about style or beauty or even quality. They cared about speed. The faster and simpler an item was made, the cheaper it was to sell, and low prices are what lured people to Block. Eventually, they forced other manufacturers out of business because they couldn't create items as quickly or as cheaply as Block.
Saint Dane told this story with glee, as if it were the most fascinating bedtime story ever. I never thought much about stores and prices and who sold what and why, but I had to admit that the story of Block was interesting, in a scary kind of way. He continued.
Block grew. It began buying other companies, folding them into their world. They moved into energy, real estate, banking, and communications. They bought hospitals and began providing medical services. They built their own schools. People followed like hungry sheep, because whatever Block sold, people bought. They simply couldn't resist the prices. Block lowered their workers' wages, which increased their profits even more. They were becoming so huge and employed so many people, the workers had no choice but to agree to the horrid terms of employment. If they refused, there was always someone ready to take their place, because Block had become the #1 employer on the territory. I think on your territory you would refer to it as the only game in town. Block eventually moved into entertainment. They made movies and music and artwork created by people who worked for them with the prices they set and with their vision in mind.
Saint Dane stepped away from the window and touched a sculpture that was a square piece of steel. There was nothing artistic about it. It was just a boring hunk of steel.
Needless to say, the art they produced wasn't inspired, but they were able to mass-produce it, while at the same time closing down the art galleries and museums, so the only works of art that people saw came from Block. You see, art makes people think. Block didn't want people to think. If that happened, they might have realized what was actually happening. After a time, the people came to think the art that came from Block was actually interesting.
What a horrible thought. A company that created all the art in the world in order to keep people from being inspired. It now made sense why the city was so gray and lifeless. Saint Dane continued.
Block grew so large that the economy of several small countries became dependent on the business they provided. At first, governments welcomed them because Block promised employment to so many. And not just in manufacturing. Block needed farmland to grow food and research facilities to create new drugs. Block swooped into these small countries with the promise of wealth and prosperity, only to become demanding slave masters. Workers were paid measly sums for working long hours, all to meet the demands of their employers. By the time these poor people realized what was happening, it was too late. Block had destroyed their economy while making everyone dependent on the company. It was brilliant.
Saint Dane gestured out to the gray city beyond the window.
Everything you see has been touched by Block, he said, almost in awe. The city of Rune is only one small example. It is not an exaggeration to say that Block runs the territory. There are governments, yes. They make their laws and have their elections, but they wield no real power. Everything is controlled by Block, because Block controls the money and the minds of the people. They even have their own security force of dados. It's about greed, Pendragon. Block offered something the people wanted, and they were all too quick to accept. And let's not forget the people who founded Block. They are quite wealthy. You won't see them living in this wretched city. Oh, no. The senior leaders of Block live in a class by themselves, all over Quillen. And at the top of that pyramid are the trustees. If you think the castle of Vigo and Leberge is opulent, you should see how the trustees live. Oh, my name is Mr. Cato, by the way. He lived on a particularly lush island that's only a short hop from here in my jet.
He held out his hands and looked at them as if they belonged to somebody else.
I think I chose my vessel particularly well. Don't you?
It looked as if there'd been a real Mr. Cato at some point, but Saint Dane stepped in and took over his identity, which meant the real Mr. Cato was dead.
People have been fighting wars forever, Pendragon, simply to gain power. The history of each and every territory is written in the blood of those who died trying to fulfill the aspirations of their ambitious leaders. What happened here on Quillen was so much more civilized and far more successful. There were no battles. Not a shot was fired in anger. You won't find military cemeteries crowded with thousands of tombstones. Yet make no mistake, an entire territory has been conquered, and the spoils are huge.
Saint Dane gave me a twisted smile and added, with a chuckle,
And the best part of all is that I had absolutely nothing to do with it.
I stood there, dazed, trying to understand all that he had thrown at me. Was it possible? Could a company grow so huge and powerful that it ruled an entire world? How do the games fit into this? I asked.
Ah, the games,
Saint Dane said with relish.
A particularly interesting sidelight. You see, my boy, greed is an addiction. It's a machine that must constantly be fed. The trustees of Block saw that their business had grown as large as possible. There was nothing left to conquer, nowhere left to expand. Most importantly, there were no more products to create and exploit in order to increase their own wealth. So they created one.
The games, I said.
Exactly. The games provide entertainment for the people and a constant source of revenue for the company. Block takes a percentage of every bet placed, no matter who wins.
But people are betting with more than money, I said. I've seen people carted off after losing a bet.
Oh, yes,
Saint Dane said, laughing.
These people have very little money to wager. Of course, that doesn't stop them from gambling. The chance of improving their sorry lives is too tempting. Remember, greed. Though they may not have money to wager, they do have something that is much more valuable, their lives. When people make the ultimate bet, a win means they might have more food for their families. Food grown, processed, and sold by Block, of course. Or they might win a higher-paying job with Block. Or a larger home built by Block. The possibilities are endless.
What if they lose? I asked.
Several things could happen,
Saint Dane said.
Usually they are retrieved and sent to an area of block where their particular talents are needed. Laboring with little or no pay increases the bottom line for block. The losers could be separated from their families for years in Second Earth terms, or they could be sent for medical research, or to the TARS.
What is the TARS? I asked.
TARS is power, he answered. You might call it electricity. TARS powers the territory, but it's volatile, much like nuclear power on Second Earth. Cleaning up the waste produced in a TARS factory is the lowest job there is. The good news is no one works in a TARS factory for long, because the waste is poisonous. I understand it is a painful death.
I had to sit down on one of the cold black couches. It was like the weight of what Saint Dane was telling me was pushing me down. He had just described a territory that was a living nightmare. The people of Quillen were zombie-like slaves to the greedy people who ran Block. A store. Saint Dane added,
I've often seen cases where fathers wager with the lives of their children.
No.
Oh, yes. The lure of the big win is simply too much to resist. Greed, Pendragon.
My thoughts went back to that arcade, where the guy beat the video game and was reunited with a little kid. I wondered if he had bet with the life of that kid. I felt sick to my stomach.
I'd like to say you've already lost Quillen,
Saint Dane said, trying to sound sympathetic. I know he wasn't.
But I'm afraid that isn't entirely true. Quillen never had a chance. The territory will crumble, and when it does, I'll be here to help them rebuild. Oh, I have wonderful plans. You have to admit that the people here have made a horrible mess of things. Under my guidance, Quillen will once again become strong. Even you have to admit they need help. I can give it to them, Pendragon. I can help all the territories. What's happening here on Quillen isn't unique. Time and again it's been proved that the people of the territories are incapable of guiding their own destinies. All I want to do is help. Is that so bad?
He said this last with a gleam in his eye that made me want to punch him. I think I would have, if I thought it would do any good. Why did you bring me here? I asked. The demon walked back to the window and gazed out at the grim city.
I want to see how strong you really are, and the only way to do that is to see you lose.
I thought the territory was already lost.
Not the territory, fool!
Saint Dane snapped.
You!
He lost his cool for a second, but quickly regained it.
I'll admit, I'm surprised by how you've disrupted my plans on so many of the other territories. Press said you would be strong, but I had no idea just how resourceful you could be. Bravo! If I were being perfectly honest, I'd have to say I thought you would have given up by now, but that's not the case, is it?
No, it isn't, I said. Saint Dane was actually complimenting me and admitting his own failures. How weird was that?
I have a proposition for you,
he said.
I know you don't have to compete in the Quillen Games. I'm sure you'd find a way to escape from those Vigo and LeBerge buffoons, but I'd like you to compete in this extravaganza they call the Grand X.
Really? I said sarcastically. Is that all? Why, sure, I'd do anything for you, old pal. Saint Dane laughed.
Will it be that simple?
In your dreams.
I thought not.